This video is going to help you with your Chapter 7 enrichment project. At this point, you should already have your measurements done of your room and at least 5 pieces of furniture within the room, and you should have the conversions done on your paper. I'm just going to look at the dimensions of a room. I want to give you an example to work from. So here's my example, and this is what your work should look like on the chart. So make sure you have the conversion work. I need to see the work, okay? You can even go to the extent of canceling out your units. That would be great. And on your end answers, you can go ahead and round those values if you would like. I rounded it to the nearest tenth. You can round those if that will help you. You don't need to drag them on out. But your work should be done for your conversions at this point. So the next step is to figure out what's the appropriate scale to make your scale drawing take up most of the graph paper, but of course it has to fit on the graph paper. So I wanted to give you an example of how you can do this so that on your project day you can work on this on your own and have the right scale. So to choose your scale, the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to count the number of squares across both dimensions of your graph paper. You need to know how many blocks you have to work with. And what I mean by that is, there's these little squares. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Count how many blocks you have going across your paper, and then count how many blocks you have going down your paper, okay? I already counted this piece of paper here. Yours may be different. So on this piece of paper, I have 29 blocks across, and I have 18 blocks down. If you want to pause and do that now, you can do that, or if you just want to watch this and then do it at the end, you can do it that way too. Once you know how many blocks you have to work with, you're going to trial and error and play around with some scales until you find one that's going to fit. Remember proportions. That's what you're going to use here. And in a proportion, we learned that it's always the drawing or the model over the actual or to the actual amount. You don't have the scale, but that's what you're going to try to come up with. Here's what you do have. You know you're going to have some sort of scale, and it's going to be blocks to meters. And over here, you're going to figure out, well, in that scale, if this is blocks to meters, then this is going to be the blocks on the drawing to the meters in the real life, right? Pick one of your dimensions to work with. If you want to start with the larger one, start with the larger one. It doesn't really matter. So I'm looking at my kitchen length, and my actual kitchen length came out to be 4.5 meters. That's going to be my value down here. What I'm trying to figure out is an appropriate scale that will fit. I would set up your scale as how many blocks is to 1 meter, because that might be the easiest to think about, okay? This will be the number then right here that you might change. You might have to trial and play around with it. So I'm just going to pick a number to work with, thinking about 29. If I have 1 block per 1 meter, that means my room would only be 1, 2, 3, 4.5 long, and that's definitely not going to take enough of my paper, right? So I need to have multiple blocks representing 1 meter. Pick a number and just start with something. Maybe I start with 5, okay? 5 blocks represents 1 meter. Let's see what this works out to be. Then this is what you're solving for. How many blocks on your paper will represent 4.5 meters according to this scale? You know how to solve a proportion. Go ahead and cross multiply. You're going to have 1 times x equals 5 times 4.5. Or x equals 5 times 5 is 25, carry the 2. 5 times 4 plus the 2 is 22.5. So what this number would mean would be how many blocks you would go across your paper to make the length. 22.5 blocks, would that fit on my graph paper? Yes. And would it take up most of the graph paper? Yes. That's what you want to think about, okay? Now, one thing I forgot to say is I would definitely match up the longer side with the longer side of paper, and then do the shorter side on the shorter side of paper, right? So I'm going to match mine that way. So this scale might work. If you find a scale that you think is big enough, it's going to take up most of your paper, you got to try the other dimension. So let's try this scale using the other one, using the kitchen's width. Well, if I have, again, 5 blocks to 1 meter, and on my drawing, I want to know how many blocks that's going to be to represent 3.8 meters, we can cross multiply to solve. When you cross multiply, you're going to have 1 times x equals 5 times 3.8. Or x equals 5 times 8 is 40, carry the 4. 5 times 3 is 15, with the 4 is 19. what would this mean? This would be how many blocks you would need to represent 3.8 meters. Is that going to fit on my graph paper? No, this one's not going to work. So that was the first scale I tried. I didn't work out. You need to adjust from there. Does your scale need to be larger or smaller? Do you need to have more blocks or less blocks representing 1 meter? Well, since this was just a little bit over, I need to push this number down. Okay, so try the next integer down. You can play around with decimals if you want, but I wouldn't worry about it. Let me try a scale of 4 blocks to 1 meter and see if that will work on both of these. So I'm going to try both because I'm thinking it should work since I was so close on the last one. I know it'll fit. I'm hoping it'll fit. I know it'll probably fit on the length at least. Okay, so try this now. Cross multiply. We would have 1 times x, or x equals 4 times 4.5. That would give me 18. So that'll definitely fit across my length. It's not going to take up my whole paper, but it'll take up a decent part of it. And then let's try the width. We'll cross multiply. 1 times x is x, and 4 times 3.8 is going to be 15.2. Will that take up most of my paper? Yes. So in my case, it took me 2 tries to find out my scale. What is my scale that I'm going to use to draw my furniture then? 4 blocks represents 1 meter. Okay, which means that's the same as, you could say 4 blocks is to 1 meter, or you could say that's 1 block is to how many meters? Well, you can see here that I took 4 and divided it by 4 to get 1. So if I take 1 and divide it by 4, I will get 1/4 of a meter. 1 block represents 1/4 of a meter. So I'm using what we learned about about equivalent ratios. Once you have your scale, and here's my scale, 4 blocks is 1 meter, then I'm going to use that to convert and draw all of my furniture pieces as well. You can use a calculator to help you. Once you have that, when you do your drawing, use a ruler, make it straight, make it colorful and neat, and don't forget to draw your dimensions down on there. If you need any help with this, please stop by my room.